Okay,
Bagel.
we're live.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to live stream joining us. So, in case you start to space out today, you can go back and watch this on YouTube. You will be able to re-engage with that. So, it's incredible to see so many of you here to learn about learning. As an educator myself, it's one of my greatest passions. So, thank you for joining us. I know we're still getting settled in. More chairs have been ordered. We're working on it. Thank you for being flexible. It's certainly the first rule of teaching. As you're coming in, if you can grab one post-it note and one name tag, that would be helpful. We're going to start with the post-it note and the little pencil right now. This is just for you. So handwriting doesn't count. You just need to know what you're thinking yourself. We wanted to start by welcoming everyone, saying how meaningful it is to see all of you here. All of you who care so deeply about your children, their learning, and about our school community. I want to remind you there's fresh coffee and bagels in the back, so please just make your way there as you wish. We are here to talk about learning today, and about how we learn, and about how we teach. It's more today about how we learn than how we teach, so I wanted to start with that. But what I thought might be helpful, because everyone around the table has a different perspective and understanding, and everyone came here today for a different reason. What I thought might be helpful to start with for yourself is what I'd like you to do is write down on the yellow post-it note for yourself, why are you here today? Please answer the question, what brought you here today? And then when you finish, what you can do is just set your pencil down, or if you're not at a table, you can just give me a thumbs up, and then I'll be ready to move on. We asked for more chairs.
Yes, they're on their way. Are they on their way?
Yeah.
Okay, and there are also these stools, if anybody wants to sit on one of the stools, you know what I mean? Rock through the meeting. There's also a sign up sheet. I can also.
See, many people are done writing, some people are still writing, some people are eating, that's even better.
Right.
So I know that we're all familiar faces here, but just as a reminder, I'm Rabbi Deborah Schuldenfrei, the head of school. Joining me today is Nancy Herbst, our Director of General Studies, Nora Moreno, our Coordinator of Curriculum, and Lisa Woodward, our Literacy Specialist. We also have many teachers and parents who are teachers, and parents who are here to join us. Tamara Rath is also here to understand and get a sense of what's happening this morning. So thank you for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Nancy, and we will continue.
Nancy. Hi, everybody. Good morning. So one of the things that our teachers do almost every year in almost every grade level, in almost every class, is they want to find out what kind of learners they have in their class. So they do a learning style questionnaire or an interest survey. So we thought, how could we possibly start this morning talking about learning styles and talking about the way we learn without asking you to do the same thing. So I'm going to pass this out and ask you each to take 1 second before, and I wonder if we're going to have enough. I hope so, but not for them. We can't share. These we can't share, so if we need more, I'll get more for you. And this is going to be a quick way. Don't overthink it. I want your gut response to these, and that's what the little golf pencils are for. So please pass those around, and I'll explain very quickly how we're going to do this. And I think we'll probably need a few more, so tomorrow we'll probably use you if necessary. So this is one of those often, sometimes, never. And we're asking you not to overthink this, to give your first gut response. Okay? So for those of you that have it, you've got 3 sections. Don't forget that you've got your section on the back as well. And I want you to just ask yourself the question and go with your immediate gut response. Never, sometimes, often, and a 1, 2, or 3, hit it.
Yeah, there's pencils here, don't be shy, we have plenty of pencils around the table. Here we go.
Who needs a survey? Pencil over here, okay, don't throw it.
Any other surveys? We need a couple more.
Okay, so we need, yeah, why don't you go make me 10 more surveys, please? Thank you. You're getting one. Who needs a pencil? Great. Can't share your answers, I'm watching, Amanda, I'm watching. No cheating.
Collaborative.
Okay, that's a good way to say it. Yes, you do have to do some math. If you have your phone, you can cheat.
And for the live streamers, what we'll do is, when we send out the link, we'll also have attachments, so that you can fill out the self-assessment as well. One person's watching, but you don't know, this could go viral on YouTube.
One person is, no, one, a device is watching, maybe there's a hundred people there.
Like the NFL.
Yeah, they're all gathered around.
It's a viewing party. The NFL race. Let's see how it all plays out.
Sorry.
And you can't get the answer wrong, so just go ahead and answer what strikes you and don't have to overthink it. We are so paralyzed by our overthinking. It's okay. You got the answer right, you got a gold star for me.
We're gonna have you guys finish this out.
Okay. And the sign-in paper, can someone raise their hand if they have the sign-in paper at their, in front of them? We have more, Carly has brought us more of the, self-assessment. And the sign-in sheet, is that somewhere floating? We can start another one. Okay. So I know some of you are just getting the self-assessment now, but we'll just give about 1 or 2 more minutes for that. I see some of you are starting to add up numbers.
So we got some more learning. Sandra, did you want? No. Okay. Just say hello. Just say good morning. Good. So at this point, if you can find a good stopping point. There's a lot of reading this morning, and this is early for some of you. And your eyes are not quite focused yet, so there you go. The life of a teacher, you're ready to go.
Yeah,
If
but
you are, if you sign one sign in sheet, that's good,
Sorry.
you're good to go. Thank you very
so
much.
good to see you.
And so this was just a quick way to get a snapshot of what kind of a learner you are. And like I said, the teachers use this also as an introductory exercise in their classes, often right at the beginning of the year to find out what kind of learners they have. So when you look at the back of your little assessment or your little questionnaire, probably a better way to say it, you'll see your scores in section 1, in section 2, and in section 3, which identifies you as either a visual, an auditory, or a kinesthetic learner. Everybody know what a visual learner is? Someone who what? Who likes to see it? Who likes to see it? What's an auditory learner? Someone who likes to hear it. And what's a kinesthetic learner?
Needs to move.
Someone that needs to build it, someone that needs to experience it. But sometimes, as you'll see in our handy dandy chart, sometimes you're a blended learner. Sometimes you need to see and hear, sometimes you need to do and listen, sometimes you, and any combination thereof. So these are ways that we start to learn who we have in our classroom when we start to teach. Because as an introduction to a new classroom, teachers want to see what kinds of learners they have. So this is one of the interest surveys that we do, and one of the ways that teachers get to learn how to model or how to plan their lessons.
That was me.
And I'd like to welcome Emily Fight. Emily, say hi to everybody. So that's how I try to find out what kind of learners we are. And did anybody find out anything about themselves that maybe they didn't know during the survey? And if you did, you're not willing to share, and that's A-okay, so there you go. But what I've also passed out to you, I turned it upside down to heighten the mystery, is there's just a little bit of an analysis or an explanation of, and I really like the way that we wrote distractibility. I think that is, for some learners on the very bottom there, that's excellent. So there are, very creative, but there are ways that you can really see what preferred learning style, spelling, reading, et cetera, there's more information for you to take and look at, both regarding yourself as a learner and your child as a learner. So hang on to this, refer to it as you see fit, and I hope you did find out something interesting about yourself this morning. It is interesting, thank you. It is interesting, isn't it? Great. The question that we're really here to answer today is how do we meet the needs of all of our learners at our school, and what are we currently doing to meet the needs of our learners? So I just want to talk to you, and then Lisa and a guy are going to help me with this definition as well. So one of the things that we do, as you well know, is all of the kids are put in general studies classes, a 2A, a 2B, a 3A, a 3B, et cetera, et cetera. So that's whole group instruction. But within that whole group instruction, we also have small group instruction. So that sometimes the teachers will pull a small group that maybe need maybe a little bit more reinforcement, or maybe they need what we'll call a little bit more extension. So that would be small groups within the whole group. So that's something you'd see all the time. You might see that in social studies, in writer's workshop, in a language lesson, in a grammar lesson. Those are whole group and small group instruction. We have fluid, like learner groups. Those are the places where we talk about some different class placement, where kids are in different groups during that reading block, during that math block, during the Hebrew block. Those are our fluid, like learner groups, where we use data, and we make sure that the kids that are there have similar learning profiles. Not so much their learning styles necessarily, but their profiles that we use additional data to collect. We also have our student success team meetings, and that's where the adults get together and talk about each student, and Lisa's going to talk to us a little bit more about that specifically, of how those SST meetings inform our instruction and inform how we best meet the needs of all of our kinds of learners.
And Nancy, what I would just like to say is that the SST meetings coming in with fresh eyes is one of the things one of the systems within our school that I think really operates best. I think it is really a highlight of why you would choose a school like BBS Day School, because it is not just one administrator that is working with your child or one teacher. It is a team of people who are like-minded and who are sharing and having buy-in and having input in order to assess from different perspectives, from a psychological perspective, from a general studies, from the general studies teacher, and all of those opinions, ideas, and thoughts come together in order to support the student. Sometimes those meetings happen with you as the parent, and sometimes they're happening without you because they're happening within the support system of the administration. And that is something that I have found to be really one of the ways that we meet the needs of all learners, because the student is put at the center.
And I'll piggyback on that to say that was one of the things that we got a large commendation for through the art accreditation. They also thought, when our accreditation team was here last year, they also thought that was a real strength of our school. So kudos to us for that. We also provide one-on-one instruction. So again, I mentioned the writer's workshop. There are times where during writer's workshop, your child is called over to work with his or her teacher on an individualized basis. And sometimes it might be a small group. You might see a centered approach in some of the classrooms. Those would be, and sometimes it's one-on-one. Sometimes, again, like I said, it's small group. So that we would call that teacher conferencing. And then we have our learning specialists. So we have Lisa in grades K through 3, where she has what we call pull-out programs, where we have some kids come and work with her in the classroom to get some additional support to solidify some of those reading skills. And then we also use her in the afternoon. Use her expertise for additional help for any of our learners in the older grades or in any grades who may need a little bit of additional support one-on-one again. And we have a learning specialist named Arpy, and she uses what we call a push-in approach. She goes into the classes in 4th through 6th grade so that she helps kids in that classroom, again, be able to access whatever it is that the teacher is teaching. So that's really what we call our learning specialists here. And then, of course, using these SST meetings, these action plans that Lisa's going to talk about a little bit more, and from what we know as professionals, sometimes we make accommodations and sometimes we make enrichments, again, according to the learning styles and according to what the children need. So that's what's currently happening at Valley Beth Shalom Day School in the classrooms, in sort of in a snapshot. So Lisa, you're going to tell us a little bit more about, no, I think I'm going to ask the guy. Oh, no, you're going to, sorry. Check your notes, Nancy. Lisa's going to tell us a little bit more about the SST meetings, and then I'm going to throw it to her guy.
Okay. So yes, we have a great learning support team, and as Nancy mentioned, we're really proud that the visiting accreditation team gave us the highest commendations for what we do in there. Basically, we discuss each student formally at least 2 times per year, many more times informally. So you're getting teachers and specialists and administrators constantly talking about the good parts of your kids. We're determining the academic, social, and behavioral aspects of each child and how to best meet the needs of each child in each of these aspects. And if necessary, we might invite you to a formal meeting where we're all there, the same team as Deborah said, and we will then from there create action plans. And an action plan basically gives suggestions for how the teachers and sometimes how the parents will work to meet the needs of those particular students. And sometimes we've created individualized academic plans for some of our students who need more enrichment and more challenge. You said it, I think we have an amazing learning support team. I'm part of it, but I'm with better. But we really, something to piggyback on what Deborah said as well, is we really know your students. We really know your kids and as students, and to me that's what's so important when it comes to teaching your kids.
So Guy teaches 3 of our math classes in the upper grade levels, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about how he meets the differentiated needs even within his classroom.
So, first of all, I have to give Nancy a little props here.
Oh, that's why I threw it to him.
Brown nosing at the beginning always works. No, I want to say before we even cut into classes, at the beginning of the year we have a few criteria that each student has to go through to figure out where where we put them. And I have to give Nancy credit because we really go through fine combing to make sure that everyone does. And I want to say we do a pretty good job. However, in my cases, in all cases, if some student is either it's too hard for them or it's too easy for them, it is fluid where kids move from one class to another. I know I've had parents before that wanted to come into different classes. They have always been able to come if they meet the criteria. Besides that, I'll tell you the things that I do, for instance, to differentiate between my classes. My classes usually have 2 different levels. And so I try to teach so that everyone actually feels like they're getting the same education or the same lessons without thinking, oh my God, I'm bored, or oh my God, this is too hard. And what I do is I start from scratch pretending like they don't know anything. And then instead of using the book and just going through each problem, what I do is I accelerate to the point and I elevate it to see where the class is at. So I'll tell you right now, every year I teach math completely different than the year before. And it all depends on the class also. Some classes are way more advanced than others, so I'm able to fly even higher. Or there are classes that need a bit more assistance or more time on one subject than another. So it's never the same. So the different levels are always met that way, and I always like to challenge. So wherever they're at, I like to push it a little bit harder just to make sure that they're always on their toes. But also, you were talking about a different way of learning. I'm very big on visuals. So for the parents that are here with me, whenever they come in class, they always have a red and blue pen along with their pencil. And so whenever I write on the board and I want things to stand out, I have them write with red and blue. Because in my mind, when you look at notes and it's all in pencil, nothing really stands out. But when you see a few things in red and blue, everything stands out, and then they can really see what was the whole point of the lesson.
Thank you. And Lisa, talk to us a little bit about what we might see in your class regarding differentiation as well.
Okay, if you came to my extra support 3rd grade class, for example, for reading, you might see a group of 4 to 7 kids learning about the chocolate touch. So the students might be learning about how to know the beginning, middle, and end of the story. So how do I differentiate instruction? Since I know that 2 of the students have some challenges with reading out loud, I probably sent home the book the night before so they could preview the book. That's one way of differentiating. 2 others might learn best by doing, so they might get a copy of the Chocolate Touch Reader's Theater and be acting it out, which is that kinesthetic type of learning. Also, another student may be drawing out what is happening at the beginning, middle, and end, which is visualization, right? I sound like a teacher. Some of the kids might be sitting on pillows on the floor with me, where they're reading, trying to increase their fluency with the help of the teacher. And all of them then can become successful at the skill that I'm teaching, the beginning, middle, and end of the chapter. I want to teach them the other learning styles as we go on as well, so they're not, solely doing one or the other. But for now, they're learning what they need to be learning, and you're mentioning tests. And when I test them later in our famous DRA testing, I want to see, and I often do see, wonderful positive movement, so the kids can return to those grade level groups, and then I can get new students to teach. And this is how I differentiate. I see that it works. The kids gain self-confidence, and they're very successful at doing it.
Thank you. And so we keep hearing, we keep using this word differentiation. That was just a little preview of our next slide, where Nora is going to explain a little bit of how we define differentiation.
Yeah, so we hear this term a lot, and we know that good teaching requires a differentiated approach in the classroom. And so differentiation is, in a nutshell, understanding all the different learning styles, levels of readiness, and student interest. So we tailor instruction to meet those diverse and individual needs of each student. And there's different ways we can do that. We adjust the way we teach it, not necessarily the content. The content, the essential learning is the same for each student, but it's how the students can access the content that we're making adjustments in our methods of instruction. So this can mean, some of the examples that Lisa and Hagai both used, making things more visual for the visual learners, making sure lessons incorporate those different learning styles and approaches to teaching them. So this would mean, seeing a video for those visuals, an image, working with something, creating something. So making sure lessons are addressing those different learning styles. also making sure that the materials, the curriculum materials, whether that's reading materials or other curricula, is accessible as far as readability and accessibility for the students. So that can mean varying levels of so the students can access that content. That also means meeting with students to maybe reteach a concept or a skill, or extending the skill for students who have more of a background knowledge or some solid understanding of that. So that's kind of the what and the delivery of instruction, and then the processes and practices that the students go through to understand and learn the content can mean in a differentiated classroom, what you see is some of the examples that were already talked about. You see small group collaborative work. Some students may be working on something together. You may see students working individually because they prefer to access that material individually, and they're ready to access it individually. You may see students working with the teacher in a small group, or the teacher one-on-one. We see a lot of this approach during our writer's workshop, where you have a mini lesson, and this is what we strive to look for too, is that the teacher is not talking at the students the entire lesson, that there's different things going on in the classroom, that a mini lesson is taught, a specific skill, a specific content area, and then the class is broken up into this gradual release of responsibility with some guided practice, making sure the students can understand it with you, then moving into some independent practice, whether that's in groups, pairs, or individual. So it's kind of this I do, we do, you do approach. And so that's really what a differentiated classroom should look like, what should be happening in the classroom itself. And then there's also the way that the students demonstrate what they have learned. So we want to make sure that we give student choice and student voice, that we don't expect the same product, the same demonstration of what they've learned by every single student. So there can be different options on how they're going to show their learning, whether they create an iMovie, whether they do a skit, whether they write a book report, or whether they have an interview with each other. The students, many of the students love to use technology to use that. So you'll see students acting something out on their iPads, or doing some sort of a interview to show that each other understands whatever content.
And I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
And say that even though some of you will see assessments, so we still give tests and assessments in our school, but some of the assessments that you might not see, maybe a child has had that assessment read aloud to him or her. So that's something that even when the assessment comes home, you might not know that. Or sometimes the assessment has been modified so that just to make sure that the essential learning is evaluated. So that child might not have to answer all of the questions that maybe another child might have to answer, or another child might have to take it one step further. So we still do have traditional, if you will, assessments, but sometimes those are differentiated as well.
Yeah, and we can also adjust rubrics. The students, they get rubrics on what they need to demonstrate. So those can be adjusted as well. Maybe a part of the rubric is given to a group of students to demonstrate these certain skills, and then more of a rubric is given. We're all really trying to assess how they're accessing the content, that they're accessing it in a way that best suits their individual learning, diverse learning style, needs, readiness, and interest. And so we have to tailor not only the instruction, the method of instruction, the way they demonstrate their understanding, and then also what a big part of it is our learning environment. Not only the physical setup of the classroom, we want to make sure that we're providing spaces for individual work, we're providing spaces for collaborative work, we're providing, again, materials that are accessible for all levels of our learners, and that we're creating an environment, an emotional, a safe environment emotionally for our students, so that we have, and this is, I think, we're in our second year of Ruler, and we're seeing that the students are using their charter not only for themselves and their emotional regulation in the classrooms, but they're using it within the context of the classroom and what they're studying. So they're able to feel safe and feel in a positive, nurturing environment. So those are some of the different ways.
Differentiated.
Yeah.
So just to loop back one more time, because repetition is really essential in an educational process. Differentiation is tailoring instruction to meet the needs of the individual learners. That's what differentiation is. I know that sometimes a educational concept can take on its own buzzword or meaning within a community. And that comes with its own understandings, because sometimes the way we understand the definition of something can be differentiated amongst ourselves. But what we're talking about when our school approaches differentiation, it's about tailoring the needs to best fit the students that we have in our school. And so one of the pieces that we talked about in preparing for this forum is how will that continue to evolve at our school? Because we already have many aspects of differentiation, as you've heard, and many of those are so successful. And in any educational community, what is essential is practice, reflection, recommendations, and implementation. And that is the process of education. Any educational institution is constantly going through that process in order to continue to support the community that is present and to continue to think about how to plan ahead for the future. So the concept that we're going to begin with our faculty and administration in the fall of next year is something called a professional learning community, or a PLC. PLCs are ways for schools, or any educational community, to take a look at what we do, to reflect on, it's gonna sound familiar, to reflect on it, to make recommendations, and then to do implementation. So for example, last year, we went through a very full accreditation process through both the Bureau of Jewish Education and also our accrediting institution. And the process was, it looked like taking a lot of reports, it looked like sitting with students, it looked like sitting with teachers, observations, but it was basically a reflection of what was happening, but that was done with an outside group, okay? So the outside group of accreditators, so those are team members made up of heads of school, of general studies directors, of teachers, of other professionals. There's even tax people involved, if you can imagine, in those accreditations, there really are. And what they do is they reflect on what they see, they write recommendations, and then the next phase for the school to do is the implementation. So we are doing that currently based on what we, oh, hold on one second. Oh,
I'm gonna jump in and say, but what really precedes that is the self-study that we do ourselves. So that's before they even come in and take a look at what they think. We've already done the hard job months before of really tearing things apart, looking at them and putting them back together, and then creating the self-study document that they work from, sorry.
Yes, so that's just one example about how this can work. A professional learning community is different from an outside accreditor coming in and making their recommendations, because what it does is it allows the staff and the faculty and admin who knows the school, who knows the culture, who knows the parents, to make recommendations from within. So there is a reaching out in terms of, let's talk about what some of these other schools, let's go and observe, let's see what's happening, let's understand what the leading or best practices are all around, and let's hear and read articles and gather research so that we can then assess that together, rather than hiring a firm outside to come in and say, outside firm, tell us how to take on differentiation. We're gonna do it from within. And that's not only cost effective, but it's actually also very much a symbol of the culture of a school, that we trust our educators and we trust our administrators, and we trust that from within we can build out to where we want to get to. So, and with an educational approach, there also has to be some trust that you don't necessarily know the outcome at the beginning of the process, because it is a learning process and it is a process of unfolding and discovering. So that means, can I tell you right now what I'm going to recommend? I can't, because we have to go through the process of looking and understanding. So the professional learning community will be open for members of the faculty and administration to be part of, and they will work in a manner over from the fall of 2019 till the spring of 2019 to then make the to make the reflections, the self-study, to gather the research, and then the second stage of that will be to make the recommendations. The very final stage of that is the implementation, and that's what really takes time and thought in order to happen. So one of the mistakes that educational communities make all the time is that they hear about something, they say, let's do that. We saw this actually about 15 years ago with preschools. preschool started to hear that everyone was talking about Reggio Emilio and the emergent curriculum, and they were like, let's just do that. That's a good idea. I'm just gonna have all my teachers do that. So if Johnny comes in and Johnny's talking about dogs, that week we'll study about dogs. Well, if a teacher is not prepared in that philosophy or course of study or way of being, then you can't just expect a teacher to do that. It's totally unreasonable. So part of the reason for having a professional learning community in the first place is to make sure that our teachers are on board and that when recommendations are made, that we're preparing our teachers properly so that the implementation process can happen over time in a steady fashion, in a well-prepared and organized fashion, to discover and learn how we can even improve and consider differentiation for our community. So that is the reflection, recommendation, implementation piece. A huge piece of this is to affirm our successes. One of our accreditors from the Bureau of Jewish Education said she had never even seen such incredible small group instruction happening at any other day school, and she has seen many. So she really wanted us to know that what we're doing is outstanding, and she thinks even a model for other schools. And so, we are going to affirm the successes, and we are going to affirm the things that are really going right, and we're also going to explore and see what else can happen within our school. But this is over a long range of time, and with many different voices and thoughts of input.
Deborah, in the fall to 2019 to spring of 2020, the process there says reflection, recommendation, implementation.
So that would be reflection.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Correct. Reflection. With
And-
recommendation.
Right.
And then implementation can't even start, even if we're able to fully pull it together by fall of 2020. It just takes so much time to prepare teachers if there are major recommendations made. It could be that we go through this process and decide we are affirming our successes. There's really very little that we need to tweak or do. And there isn't this like overhaul or anything that needs to happen. So that might happen as well. It's going to depend on what we understand about what we currently do and how we can continue to proceed moving forward. Does that answer your question, Georgiana?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Well,
So I think I'm gonna move into questions. Because I know,
this in the past or not?
I mean, I gave the example of accreditation, but just as an overview, this process, reflection, recommendation, implementation, is what we did to prepare for bringing Ruler to our school with our social emotional learning. So these are all familiar things. Our writers workshop, which has just been really successful, and we're continuing, we're still preparing teachers, we're still sending teachers to teacher training about writers workshop.
In February, as a matter of fact.
So these are things that just take time to do in order for it to become part of the entire school. So sometimes you can pilot it in one, there's so many different ways to implement, right? Like you can pilot in one class. And we do this with technology. I'm meeting here with the technology task force. Sometimes what we do with technology is we try something in one class, and then we see how it works, and we tweak and we work and we reflect, and then we say, yes, we're ready to do this in the whole school, or you know what, like, that didn't work. Or yesterday I was sitting with Tamar and Rabbi Avi, and we were talking about a Judaic piece that we were thinking about piloting and then implementing. Those are all examples of ways that these things happen in our school all the time. But I feel like the time has come for some parent questions, and so I'm going to begin with Tamar, and then I see Rabbi Farkas has a question, so.
have you considered including parents in the reflection section of it, acknowledging, or those of us who are not educators would not be able to give a, input in terms of like what is best practices, but just our perspective, because let's say we might see at home how going through the small group or the differentiated learning has an effect on our children, that we might be able to provide an input of saying like, well, maybe they were struggling in elementary school, but because of the support now, I can tell you as they're in high school, they're excelling.
Yes, and this is what we hear, by the way, from our parents, is that the students who graduate from our school are remarkably successful at the top middle schools and high schools in our city. And so the question, though, was about parent participation in this process. And so what I want to reassure you is that the parent partnership is essential at all levels of our school. It's essential in advancing the mission of our school and in the very way we understand what it means to be part of a Jewish day school community. So we always look at parents as our partners. In terms of this particular issue or matter, the professional learning community itself will be made up of the professionals from the school. However, in the input piece, there can be places where we build in input focus groups so that parent voices can be heard. And I can tell by the number of people in the room that this is an issue that really speaks to your heart and is a reason why you chose our school in the first place. And I really want to affirm that and let you know that we want to continue hearing you. This is why we want to make sure to open up and have transparent conversations between the administration and the parents, so it doesn't feel like anything's happening behind closed doors or with secrecy, or that suddenly you'll just come in the fall and everything will look completely different and we'll have pulled the rug out from under you when you've been so happy here for many, many years. I actually see parents here from so many different grade levels, and that's very reassuring to me that regardless of when you were recruited to be part of our school, that you care deeply about your child's learning. So I want to say that. Does that help answer your question?
Absolutely.
Rabbi Farkas.
Yes, I have a couple questions. First
Yeah.
one's really more of a clarifying question.
Sure.
Can you clarify, like, differentiation? Just tell me if I'm right. Differentiation means that students will be learning the same material in the curriculum, but how they come to that material is different, as opposed to students learning at different levels that learn different material in the curriculum.
It can be both, it can be a combination of both, you can hybridize it, as you say, it kind of depends on the learner and where they are and what they need. But yeah, it could be varying complexity of the lesson, but it's the same essential standard, right? So we have our standards that we have to teach, but we may be extending them and enriching them for students who have, say, lack more background knowledge in this particular concept or skill. So that's why we do informal pre-assessments, whether that's like a KWL chart, like what do you already know, what do you wanna know? And so we can see like, okay, if this child or group of children, students is pretty well versed in this, we're not going to keep them, we're not gonna deliver that instruction the same way. We may vary the level of what we're going to teach, but essentially the subject matter itself is the same. But it could vary in
Depth and
depth and complexity, thank you.
Right, but as opposed to, let's say, group A is learning book A and group B is reading book B, and neither group is reading each other's books.
Well,
So that's
that's the materials that they use, but remember, both group A and group B might be learning about main idea.
Yeah.
So that they're learning the skill might be, I'll just continue to use main idea, and maybe group A can access it differently, maybe at a higher level, and group B can access it in a little bit more of a supported manner or a scaffolded manner, but they both need to learn how to find and identify the main idea.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not just talking about strict traditional
Right.
leveling.
Yeah.
We're
Right,
talking
right.
about differentiation and
Yeah.
there's a difference.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, because I know this has come up before, is students who receive accommodations, whether they're auditory or visual accommodations, right? Or maybe they're receiving less questions on a test because they could have to have a reader or something, right? They're, sometimes parents ask like, well, are they getting a leg up because they get to have to do less work, right? I just want to clarify when we talk about differentiation, right? Sort of like you maybe address that.
I can address that, just briefly, that there's a difference between, I got a cough drop in my mouth, between accommodations and modifications. Accommodations means we want the child to have access to that same information. But that child has to have been identified in some way by a psychologist or by somebody we may provide some of those accommodations just by knowing it, but basically, the child has to need it and has to demonstrate that they need that in order to get those accommodations. It's not, with extra time on an ERB or on the RAP test is accorded to people who have shown that they really need this. So kids who don't get it don't really need it. Yeah, anybody can benefit by a little extra time, but they need to show that they need it by some sort of data. If that makes sense.
Okay. One other thing I want you to do, and I failed to do this at the very beginning, but I want you to look at the reason why you came here. And I want you to think for just a moment, because I do want to continue taking questions, like whether you feel some of why you came has been addressed, and And then if you don't feel that way, you can either raise the question now or know that because this is a process of reflection, we're only just at the beginning of this conversation. So it's not that every single question needs to be answered right in this moment, and this is something that's going to happen over time. So if you could just like review for one moment what you have, and then I'll take Emily's question in 1 second. That's okay.
In terms of just, sorry, I wrote my notes on.
That's great.
My iPhone. On my hand. But,
Yes,
Yes,
we like all
visual,
kinds of
visual
learners here.
but, you're talking about sort of having this process come from within, like an internal process, which I
Correct.
think is wonderful. Now, you're talking about, not hiring an outside firm. So you're talking about having, like the educators. Are you gonna be having like teachers involved in this? Are they
Yeah,
gonna be-
teachers are educators.
Exactly, that I understand,
Yes,
but are
yes.
you gonna be asking them to like volunteer, are you gonna be pinpointing them to be on this committee, like, how is that
Sure.
process gonna come about?
Sure, so you're talking about specifically the selection of
Yeah.
the professional learning community. So, we have, a few different professional learning communities that are happening currently. And, it's a new concept here at the school and one that we're going to emphasize even more next fall in terms of different areas of education, that we wanna be focused on. And so I would say it's a combination of both. It is both a self-selection and a, invitation. It is not by invitation only. It is a partnership. Is that helpful? Yes. Yes, thank you.
Is everything that we've been talking about, I'm seeing that we have our general studies team here.
Yes.
Is this something that's also going to be implemented in the Hebrew and Judaic studies? Oh, there's Tamar.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a shill,
it's a shill.
Yes.
I wanted to assure you that the whole Hebrew Judaic Studies department has the exact same philosophy in terms of how we look at learners, how we place learners, how we assess learners, the flexibility between going from group to group. So as I think many of you know, from 3rd grade through 6th grade, we have different groups as they do in language arts and math, also in Hebrew. But we also differentiate in Judaic studies in terms of the rubric, in terms of what a final product may look like, how we're going to assess a different student, what our expectations are. So thank you for the question. I know it wasn't up there and I was going to jump in, but I appreciate that. Our school has one philosophy, one educational philosophy that you can see that all of our teachers embrace and that is reflected in all of our programs. So thank you so much for asking the question.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Tamar. I mean, sometimes there's the question about how all of these things come about and what it means at this point to have a very separate general studies from a separate Judaic studies. And so it's helpful for us to talk about the school as a whole. So I really appreciate the question. I saw, yes.
Hi, just for clarification,
Sure.
when you say students will all be learning the same material, are you considering reducing the number of separate accelerated classes?
Okay, so I can imagine that for many of you that this is a big concern, and maybe that's on your post-it note today, is are we reducing the number of accelerated classes? So at this point, that's not in the plan. Like I don't have a plan yet. At this moment, the plan is to look, to reflect, and to affirm the best practices and move forward. But I want to assure you, this meeting is not about eliminating accelerated classes. It's about taking a look at how we learn, and then, according to how we learn, figuring out how we can best teach. Is that helpful,
Yes.
Robin?
I'm trying to formulate sort of what I'm asking.
That's okay.
I
can
feel
come
like
back.
there's two different things, differentiation between each classroom and differentiation between the different levels of, so I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about, is that it's differentiation within each group perhaps. Let's say you have support, let's say you have 3 different levels, and then within each class can each teacher differentiate the different learners within each, and that's what I think that, is that how you're looking at it, how each teacher can better differentiate within their classrooms? Or more like combining it, that's what it sounds like.
Okay, so I wanna take a step back, because I know a lot of you are here for different reasons. That I'm wondering, Robin, are you asking me if then we're gonna put everyone back
No.
into one? Okay, so
What
help
I'm
me
asking
understand.
is, are you looking more, I'm just wondering sort of how you're approaching it, are you looking more, how can we better differentiate within each classroom?
Yeah.
Or are you looking more, how can we better differentiate it, just a general class, grade type thing, do you understand, does that make sense?
I mean, this is looking at a wide view with a broad, understanding of how this happens at our school. Does someone else wanna respond?
I think that's
Yeah.
part and parcel of what,
Yeah.
exactly what we're looking at, how, and it goes back to the title of this forum. How do we meet the needs of all learners? So it's gonna probably take some professional development, which, having been here for a few years, we've had in the past. It's probably time to bring somebody else in for, when you ask that about the professional person coming in. That's not coming in to talk about what we're doing, but to actually shore up and to give us some more strategies so that we can meet the needs of our learners that much better. But I think the question is really on the table, Robin. How do we meet the needs of all of our learners within our homogeneous classrooms and within our heterogeneous classrooms?
But those, the criteria that was back on that last slide on what is differentiation, that should be taking place in all classrooms, whether it's in a classroom that's an accelerated math class, or whether it's a general studies, social studies. But, because there's, within each group, whether it's 6 kids or 20 kids, there are different learners, and there's different preferences. and there's different-
And
You have a group of
sometimes
two, you have two different, you have
Right.
two very different
Sometimes
people.
it's as simple as letting somebody stand up. Sometimes it's as
Yeah.
simple as letting somebody stand up and do his or her work, because that's the best way that he or she can access the teacher's input.
Okay, I see a lot of questions, so I'll come around over here.
How does homework play a role in differentiation?
That's a great question. I love that. Ooh, I love the homework question. It's a great question. I think that's something we're gonna have to see and explore. I wonder why you're asking, actually.
Because for example, my third grader, I see her friends come home with a lot more homework. And then where my daughter is, she has one page, I'm done, and he's, wants to go in front of TV, iPad,
Okay.
and so, and I see where I can tell that she could do more,
Okay.
and it's such a waste of time, like sometimes I feel like she could get more, she could get more challenged, and I feel like she's not getting challenged enough. It's, so I was just curious, how does homework, how can one third grader have more homework and the other one doesn't? How do they differentiate?
Sure. And I will also tell you that 3 different students are gonna take a very different amount of time to finish the same worksheet, even if they have the exact same. But what you're actually talking about is different assignments because of what I would call the academic. Are you suggesting that your daughter's in a different academic grouping than the ones that have a lot of homework? Or are you saying they're in the same group?
Different groups.
Different
groups.
Yeah, so-
But that's what I'm curious to see how.
Sure, so I think that's definitely something that we need to take a look
I
at.
do too, and I think it's age old, to be honest with you. We've talked about homework since I've been in education, and it really is exactly what Rabbi Schuldenfrei said. The same piece of homework can take 3 kids a very different amount of time. Some kids love to get it done, so they don't have anything to do, so they'll even take some of their freer time at school, some of their unstructured time at school, not that there's very much of that, and they'll try to get it done so that they can go home without anything, because they've got scheduled things after school. So, but that's,
But it's like different homework, it's not even the same material,
It could be.
Within the same grade.
That could be, depend on level of readiness of where the student is in accessing the material and the content. But it's also, it's important not to think that differentiation or challenging is giving more work. More work does not necessarily mean the student is being challenged or that they're getting more exposure to the content. So that goes to tailoring to the needs of the child and to the student. So it may mean that is what that child needs at that time. But it's definitely an area to explore. I mean, I think that this is evolving over time. I mean, education is a very, very dynamic, reflective field. So, nothing is ever status quo or stagnant, and shouldn't be. So we're always asking questions and exploring.
But you can always ask the
That's-
teacher.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
before the fall.
Yeah, that's what I would do, yeah.
But in general, I was just curious to
Yeah.
see how, if there's a differentiation when it comes within like homework. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and
There should be.
Say something about the homework policy in general,
Yeah.
Nancy, just.
The homework policy in general goes along with the grade level. So if you're in 3rd grade, you shouldn't have more than 30 minutes. If you're in 2nd grade, more than 20 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And for some kids, that just doesn't fit, one size just does not fit all, so that's a guideline that we use. And then we ask parents to communicate with the teachers. If your child is just coming home with nothing to do, then that's what the teacher will need to do as well. That's another part of learning who your child is as a learner. And for some kids, 30 minutes, they've just begun. So we'll talk about, here's another way that we make some accommodations. We'll talk to the parent about saying maybe 10, 10, and 10, rather than 30 minutes at one time. We'll talk about changing up where the homework is done at home. Those are some of the things that we talk about back to those SST meetings, where we talk about how to, again, how best to have the child access the learning that has been done in the classroom. So that, again, not one size does not fit all, but the time frame is a guideline. And then we always tell parents, please, you're in the house. If we've got a meltdown going on, so this is the opposite of what you're talking about. If somebody's just having, too much, they've been to gymnastics and they've been to their piano lessons and gymnastics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's 7 o'clock, they've just eaten dinner and taken a shower, and they're about to start homework, and that's just not working for your family. We need to know that as well, because homework is usually just an opportunity to practice and just to sort of keep those wheels greased for the next day. It's never, ever furthering the education. It's never, ever asking them to learn something on their own. It's just reinforcing and practicing what they've learned in the class. So we want to hear that information.
I think I have time about 1 or 2 more questions, and so I'll go.
Yeah, I have a quick
Roslyn,
Is there
yeah.
an overall objective that prompted this, I guess, investigation into the learning process? Was there,
Great.
I mean, just based on
What's
your
the impetus for
experience?
why are
Yeah.
we talking about this now?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay, great question. So what I would say is that in the search process for the new head of school, there were certain things that came up a lot for the candidates, and I can speak for myself personally. And the questions about differentiation within the school, what was successful within the school, and the academic groupings was just something that came up a lot. So it was something that I felt was important for us to take a look at. Is that helpful?
Kind of. What do you mean it came up a lot? In what?
Part of the process when you're interviewing is I, as the candidate, was also interviewing the school. So I was asking questions, tell me what this looks like, help me understand, this is what I've seen in other schools, So some of it was coming from me, and a lot of it was coming from the feedback I was getting about, a lot of times when you're in an interview process, people share what their concerns are, people share what their worries are, people share what they think is the most incredible thing and the selling point of their school. So what was fascinating to me about this was that I was actually hearing the same conversation from 2 very different sides. So to me, that meant there's something here to look at. Yeah. Oh wait, hold on 1 second. I said someone over here, and then I will come to you, Irina. Okay.
First, I just want to thank you for actually exploring this. I feel like this, obviously, it's very important to all of us. That's why we're all here. And so I think it's so important that we do this, and I'm glad we're doing it. I was just curious about, I always the first thing I ask is, well, what are other schools doing? So I just wanted to know, how are you going about looking at other schools? Are you going to go on site visits?
Yeah. I think all of those things are really important in terms of, if I just gonna move back to the reflection recommendation piece, in order to understand what is working well, and it might also be helpful to look at a place, I mean, you don't tell them this, but where maybe it isn't working well, they think it's working well, but if there might be some part of the implementation process or something that hasn't gone as smoothly as they had imagined in their first steps. But definitely, what we like to call them leading practices or best practices that are happening in other places. Yeah, site visits, research and reading, like really, people are writing and reading about this stuff all of the time. And that also includes the professional development for the staff members, working with other administrators and everybody, every school is talking about this in some way, shape, or form. Because all any school wants to do is to make sure they're offering the most effective education for their child. You want what's best for your child and your learner, and we want that too, because we're your partner in this. And the only way we can do that is by having an open heart and an open mind to what that means and what that can look like. And so that's what we're committed to. Does that help give you a sense of it? Did I skip any other processes of, I know, I'll come back over here, but did I skip anything else in terms of like how we would take a broad view of what's happening in the field. Okay, here, and then, okay, then we'll stop. Okay.
I just wanted to know what you found when you looked into the different learning groups. What was the biggest weakness that you found, that you felt like when you looked at other schools that stood out and you felt like we really need to, visit this and be better at it?
I mean, I think that's just something that remains to be seen. I wonder what, when you ask about a weakness, what are you actually wondering
Just
about?
something that you feel like we can really work on with the different, learning. Because I have kids at the school that are like completely opposite
Okay.
ends of, they benefit from, a specialist and then they're, really excelling, and I don't know if this is like sometimes the right environment for this particular child. So I just wanted to know what you felt like was something that really stood out when you were interviewing or you saw other schools and you felt like, we need to.
I mean, the interview was such a cursory look, like I really spent very little time in the classrooms at that moment. So this is going to be the moment where I get to really, and using the people who spend their time and are devoted to that, in order to come up with it. So I don't think I can answer it yet.
Okay.
Okay, but that's the whole point. That's the whole point.
Deborah, can I jump in?
Of course.
I've got two daughters. One is in 8th grade at Oakwood and one is in 4th grade here. And my 8th grader was on the accelerated track for everything, and my 4th grader is dyslexic. So, two totally different learners, and the school has done an amazing, incredible job of accommodating both of them and both of their needs.
Thank you, Dana. Inbal, and then I see there's more hands, but I think for now, we're gonna just bring this to a close with the last few comments. But please know, this is an open conversation. This is something that's going to be, as I said, happening over time. If you want to speak with me about it, if you want to spend time with any of our panelists or teachers, please bring your questions to the table. We wanna make sure that we're addressing this in a way that's also parent-friendly and fits with the culture of the school, a culture that cares so deeply about their learners. So, Inbal.
So first, I really want to thank that you guys are sharing, your ideas with the parents, and it's an open conversation. My question is that when I came here because I want to understand and learn what is the change that's going to occur in the school. And I understand that we're going to assess the students from what kind of learner they are and what are their level. But I didn't really get how it's gonna get implemented in the school.
I understand.
And so my question is, if there's any other school that they have already, this model exists in them already, that we can look into it and have a better understanding of how it's gonna be? If there's any other schools that you can.
So in other words, what you're wondering is if I can direct you to like the website of a school that has done this successfully.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that every school is very different in its orientation. And so I think it might be a mistake to send you off to a website or even to observe in a school and say, this is what they've done. So this is sort of the difference between understanding something as a best practice and a leading practice. What may be best practice for our school could look different than what's best practice for another school. So while I don't want you to feel like you're leaving here with this queasiness of uncertainty, there is so much in life that is uncertain, right? That this should not be on your heart as something that is also uncertain. What I can say is this is not about a major change or overhaul, like I mentioned at the beginning. That's not what this conversation is about. This is the beginning of a conversation about how we continuously reflect on what we do, recommend how we continue to do that. And look, even in a recommendation process, I mean, the accreditation process, I have 7 pages of recommendations that we are supposed to implement over the next 7 years. That's an accreditation cycle, okay? Some of those have to do with the board structure, and some of those have to do with education, and some of those have to do with the relationship between this one and that one, and the synagogue, and all of this stuff. It's a lot, and not every recommendation gets met because the school is also like a learner. The school is just trying to do its best to continue to move forward. So I can't tell you at this particular moment what that change is going to look like. But I can't even tell you that we're completely committed to a change or an overhaul. What I can tell you is that this is something I see how many parents are here, and this is something it's time to take a look at it. We're just gonna look at it. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna think about it, and then we'll make some plans. So again, in the spring of next year, and over the course of time, we'll have more information to share. And that's not because we're keeping anything from you or hiding it. It's because the process itself needs to unfold, because that's how an educational process works. And for many of us who are in the room who work in business, this just doesn't happen fast enough. And I get that. The pace of a school is its own, and reflection and thoughtful reflection takes time. I see that spurred a lot more questions. So I want to respect people's time and let them know that if they need to leave or go, I understand that. So it's okay. All right. This is really the last three. I've broken my teacher rule. I gave you the last one out. Okay, I'm done.
I imagine that a part of this is also finding out who the child is, where they fit in to each type of learning style, how the classroom can best support that child, and then it's probably also about, because you have a child like Dana's child who can be helped even through dyslexia, even with dyslexia, but there's probably children who do not fit into this mold, and that's also information for the school.
Which mold do you mean?
This particular reflection, recommendation, implementation, differentiation, the entire umbrella of how students learn and the ways in which the school can best support them.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
I think what I'm saying is there are probably children who don't learn in any of these ways, and that's also information for the school.
These are three learning styles. There are actually a
More,
lot
but
more,
it's basic.
but they kind of
Basics.
umbrella them under these, and then they're tactile, kinesthetic. So there's a lot of different learning styles. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that there may not be, my child or this student may not be solely an auditory learner or something like that.
This child may not be a kinesthetic.
Right,
This child
right.
may not be a,
Yeah.
what do you call it, tactile learner.
Right.
And in which case, this school may not be the right
Well,
school for my
yeah.
child. And that's also,
But we're
I
not
think,
just
very
teaching,
good.
but we're
I know.
not just teaching for
I
those
know.
three learning styles. We're exploring how that child best learns. Okay, that's not their preferred learning style. So it takes a lot of
Getting to know your
getting
child.
to know your child, and this is something that I think the teachers do a good job at. They spend a lot of time, and those SST meetings, we are able to, because of size, really get to know your child. But of course, there's always.
and I'm saying that I think that it's best for the school to do this, not just for us to learn inside of our institution what we do best, but maybe we can't support a kid. Maybe that kid doesn't fit.
Well,
And that too is important for the school to find.
Yeah, it would probably take a pretty extreme case for that to be, but that does happen. Right. Okay. Yes.
So I just want to mention that we love, I think I speak for most parents, we love what's going on with VBS right now. We love the individualized attention that our kids get, the different differentiations and the group. And thank you for sharing all your thoughts with us.
Appreciate it.
Just a very quick question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if the teachers who are teaching the accelerated classes will be a part of the PLC as well.
So, of course.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we've reached a stopping point. I'll come over to you in a minute. But thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank Nancy and Nora and Lisa and Di as well. It really took a lot of time to think about how to best communicate this to parents. So go have your bagels. Sure.